So good evening, everybody. My name is Alex George. I am the owner of Skylark Bookshop, which is an independent bookstore located in downtown Columbia, Missouri. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to what I know is going to be a wonderful conversation this evening between Skylark's free-range virtual bookseller at large, Mary O'Malley, and Laura Sims, author of How Can I Help You? And right now, I will tell you, I am listening to this book, thanks to our friends at Libro FM, and I can tell you that my 12-year-old dog is exhausted as I keep taking him on walks because I want to listen to some more. So here's a copy of the book, and it's completely wonderful. It's really sort of deliciously tense, and I'm really hoping there'll be no spoilers because I'm enjoying it immensely. So we're in for a wonderful conversation tonight. Laura is the author of the critically acclaimed novel Looker. She's also an award-winning poet. She's published 4 collections of poetry, and her essays and poems have appeared in the New Republic, Boston Review, Conjunctions, Electric Lit, Gulf Coast, and more. And she and her family live in New Jersey, where she works part-time as a reference librarian, which, if you read this book, you will understand just how important that is. And she hosts the library's lecture series. If you enjoyed this evening's conversation, please help us by purchasing a copy of the book from Skylark. You can do that either by sending us an email at mail@skylarkbookshop.com. You can go onto our online shop and buy it there, and we would love to send you a copy. And if you have a question for Laura, then if you could please pop it in the Q&A if you're watching on Zoom, or in the comments if you're watching on Facebook, and we will make sure that those get to Mary so she can ask them of Laura. All right, that's all the housekeeping from me. I'm going to see if I can make myself disappear from the screen, because you certainly don't want to look at me while the conversation is going on. So Laura, welcome. It's wonderful to have you. Mary, it's always wonderful to see you. I will leave you to it.
Thank you, Alex. And welcome everyone who is watching. We are so thrilled to have you here tonight to talk about this incredible book, How Can I Help You? So, Laura, before we get started with my questions, can you just tell everybody about your book?
Absolutely. It is about 2 librarians, local public librarians, one of whom, Margot, used to be a nurse, and she left a trail of suspicious patient deaths in her wake before kind of escaping to this small town in Illinois to be a library worker. And she has been living very peacefully there and enjoying her work until Patricia, this new reference librarian, shows up. And Patricia is also kind of running from a past, although her past is not as dark as Margot's, but she has decided to, she's a writer, but she feels like a failed writer. And she has decided that she will no longer be writing and will just focus on being a reference librarian until she meets Margot. And the 2 of them become quickly kind of infatuated with each other, or interested in each other for different reasons, and it goes from there.
And it is marvelous. I was a huge fan. I've got a copy of Looker right back there. A huge fan of Looker. And so when I saw this coming out, I was so hopeful that it was going to have that same kind of dark, the narrators' voices just stay with me. And obviously you are a reference librarian, but at what point, what inspired you to say, you know what, the library would be a great place to put this book?
Good question. Yeah, I work part-time, but I started working more frequently during the pandemic, oddly, because a lot of people didn't want to return to work, and I was desperate to get out of the house after a while. And so I started working a little more often. And I think that is when I really kind of absorbed the atmosphere of the library and, got to know patrons and my coworkers better. It started with when I first started working there, one of my coworkers told me a creepy story about someone who had died in the public restroom about 2 months before I started. So that kind of stuck in my brain. And then just working there and encountering all these interesting people every day. And also realizing that people don't really know what the public library is like. I think a lot of people have kind of antiquated or romanticized notions about libraries, right? That we see on TV and in films, that they're these sacred book vaults where there's a librarian shushing people. And that is not the case at all. They're like lively community centers that welcome everyone. So I just thought, I knew I wanted to set a novel in a library. I just didn't know what it would be. And then another piece came when I listened to this episode of Criminal, the true crime podcast, really outstanding true crime podcast, and about this woman named Jane Toppin, who was called Jolly Jane. She was a nurse in the 1800s who was very cheerful and efficient. She was a great nurse, but she was also killing her patients. So she was a nurse serial killer. And she fascinated me, the real life person. And I kind of used her and one other nurse serial killer as a model. And at some point, and I don't remember when, but these things came together and I thought, oh, she has to be at the library. So
I love that. And I love that you write these women that they're on the edge. They're not the perfect protagonist, or maybe a little bit of a flawed housewife. These are women that have a dark side.
yeah.
And that I love reading books with women who have that dark side.
Yeah.
What you did it in Looker and you did it here and you do it so well. What drives these characters for you?
Yeah, they're both, Margot's dark side is really evident, right? From the beginning or early on. Patricia's kind of grows as it progresses, but I love both of them because this may sound strange, but they're both very ambitious, driven women. Margot has her drive to kill and Patricia has her drive to write. They've both had those drives kind of stifled. And I like seeing what happens when, someone's kind of primary life drive is stifled that way, and nothing good comes of it, as you know. So I think it's just really fascinating. I really like exploring the dark side of human nature. I don't really know why. I'm very cheerful in person, like Jolly Jane. But I do like exploring that dark side. I feel like it tells us a lot about human nature in general. Like looking at extremes of human behavior, someone like a serial killer, a psychopath, can tell us a lot just about ourselves and how we operate in the world. So
I agree completely. And I will not give any spoilers. So Alex, worry not about this. So this question comes, this is right on the book jacket, so it's not a surprise, but, and you've already talked about it. When Patricia figures out that Margot, she's actually this fugitive. And this is something I kept going back and thinking about, instead of going, looking it up and figuring it out and going, oh my God, I'm going to turn her in. She decides, I'm gonna hang on to this piece of information for a little bit and see where that takes me. it just, there's several places in this book where I had this kind of reaction like, oh my God. Was this always the plan? Was this always from the day you sat down to kind of write this? Is that what was in your mind? Or did that kind of come about as the characters started to reveal themselves to you?
It definitely was not planned. I thought the book was just going to be in Margot's voice, and I was writing it and loving her voice, but that would have been a lot more like Looker, where there's this one, kind of unbalanced protagonist and you're just in her world, like both Looker and Margot have a very particular worldview and you are stuck with them in it. But I felt the need to break out of that and have this other voice who would kind of be the voice of reason, or at least a foil to Margot. And so I thought, well, I'll put a writer in there. And because I could, and she's a librarian and I can channel a lot of myself into that character. But then, as that plot point develops, thinking I have to think like a writer. What would a writer do when faced with something, this moral question? And I like, those moral questions and like kind of playing with ethically ambiguous people who don't necessarily do the right thing all the time. And thinking like a writer who was ambitious and wanted to kind of salvage her career. Yeah, she might not turn her in. She might not.
Absolutely. I just want to remind everybody watching that if you have questions as we're going through this, please do put them in the Q&A and we will get to those. So again, without any spoilers, now and then a book comes along where the ending leaves me gasping. And the last one that I had this kind of visceral reaction with was He Started It by Samantha Downing, where I like screamed and went, oh my God. And I had that same reaction with this ending. So, again, kind of like that last question, did the ending, was that kind of hard and fast? This is where I'm going, or did it organically change as Patricia and Margot, as you really started getting to know them, were you just kind of taken along by them?
Yeah, I was. Early on, and this happened with Looker too, I had an image of the very end. And again, I won't give anything away, but like the very last page. And so I knew I wanted to get there, but I didn't know how. I had no idea how. And as I progressed, I started to get an idea like, okay, this will happen. And then it switched completely as the characters developed. As you were saying, there were things that I felt needed to happen in a certain way that I would never have thought when I started writing the book. So that's the fun of writing. It's also, for me, it's the hardest part is that last third of the novel where you've got to get to the end, and you got to like I know what happens through the middle here, and I have this ending idea, but how do I get there? And that can be very tricky. It was tricky with Looker also.
Yeah.
So it's challenging.
And when you got there, did you sit back and go, yeah, people are they're gonna love me or hate me for this, and either one is fine?
Yep. Basically, I did. It felt very right, and some people have loved it, some people have hated it. What are you gonna do?
For me, any book that makes me feel this strongly,
right,
does it right.
Yeah.
Whether I love it, hate it, love the characters, anything that keeps me thinking about it afterwards, it was done right. And this one absolutely did.
I'm so glad.
I know from my own experience in libraries and bookstores can be similar in the fact that they tend to attract very colorful characters. When I worked in store, it wasn't, the bookstore doesn't have maybe the same level of activities, but it is this like safe place for some of the more vulnerable or just eccentric, colorful characters to come in and spend their time. In How Can I Help You, we have Friday Guy among, so many others. Were there any of these characters that were kind of specifically tailored on somebody that you came across in the library, or were they kind of just a meld of different people that you've had come in?
They're kind of a meld of people. They're definite, like there's, I overheard a patron complaining about a book that, we had lost and that they were charged for. And, they made the claim that a lot of people do when they're angry at the library, which is I pay your salary. And so that kind of turned into this. It wasn't a huge scene or anything in real life, but it gave me the idea for Julia Mather, who's one of the eccentrics who's featured in the novel. So I definitely like melded people together, exaggerated. But, some stories, especially ones that my colleagues tell me who are full-time, who are in the library all the time, like some of their stories are stranger than fiction. So
you have plenty of material for many books, I imagine.
Yes.
So there were a lot of lines that I connected with, but there was one that I connected with so strongly as a bookseller. And it's when a patron comes in looking for something to read. Liz rattles off a litany of titles, of author names, or sometimes she leads the person right to a shelf and puts books in their hands, like it or not. It seems pushy to me, but some people love to be led and they come back for more. Is Liz around? A bookish looking man will ask. We all have gifts to offer up, even Liz.
She does not like Liz.
No. But that act of getting to know somebody, or even just speaking to them for a few minutes, and hearing what they're looking for, what they like to read, and then that knowing that I've got the perfect book for them. That's such a wonderful feeling that I know booksellers have. And my time, I think back to my childhood in a library, and like when I found the adult books, and I wasn't going to ask anybody where my horror, where the most gruesome horror books were. So I didn't spend a lot of time asking librarians, but I imagine there are, probably people feeling the same way in the library that, oh my God, I know what you want to read.
Yes, absolutely. And that is a great, great feeling. I love it too. Margot kind of in that scene you read turns it into something bad. She has a lot of book insecurity. Yes. She's not a reader. And so it was funny to play with that because yes, I love that feeling too. I think that the circulation clerks get asked for recommendations more than I do. I'm a little bit like off. So I get a lot of weird questions. I do get some traditional reference questions, and every now and then I get asked for recommendations, and it's just so exciting. And I will lead somebody to the shelves. So,
And that is my next question for those watching who maybe don't, you just see somebody behind the desk and you think they're the person I can ask about X, Y, Z, but a reference librarian is a little different role. So can you speak to that role and how, because I'm just picturing, I'm going right back into your book and remembering things, but how that influenced your writing with this?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I went to library school. I got my MLS in 2020. I finished. It took me 4 years. I went very slowly, but I, didn't really specialize in being a reference librarian. I just did like general public library studies. But when I had this in my head that I wanted to work part-time at my local library when we moved to our town in 2018, and the job that was open was reference librarian. So I took it and worked part-time there. So from my classes in my master's program, I assumed I would be helping people research, do like kind of in-depth research projects or help a lot of students with their projects. But the reality is, and Patricia in the novel is kind of disappointed by the reality. I was not. As a writer, it was nothing but wonderful for me to realize that most of my time is spent answering kind of kooky questions on the phone. There are regulars who call. There's one man who calls every week to ask what the weather is in a random city. People call to ask what TV show, when their TV show is on, what channel. There's a lot of, in the library, I do a lot of like computer kind of troubleshooting. Which is not my forte, but I have gotten a lot better at like helping people scan documents, helping people with online forms. And the reality is that, the library today is really for people who have been left behind by the digital revolution, and they don't have computers at home. Like we all kind of assume, oh, everybody has a computer, but a lot of people don't, or they're like a lot of elderly patrons who just aren't computer savvy or don't feel comfortable come in. So it was really interesting to me to see the reality of like the difference between the abstract, which I learned in school, and the real life library. So I kind of wanted to capture that. And I do make it a negative, from Patricia's point of view. But like I said, to me, it was fascinating. It really reveals a lot about our society and how terribly we have taken care of a lot of people and like not, provided for a lot of people. And the library is there to pick up the slack as best we can. So
absolutely. And a safe place
safe
again,
haven, yeah,
for these vulnerable people. Gosh, I remember when I was working in store, there was this guy that, I don't know what his deal was. He was walked around town frequently, but he'd come in like every week and he'd have a story that he had typed at the library, but he would bring it to us at the bookstore. And he was a little out there. There were some alien things that he was worried about, but he'd hand us his stories and he'd say, just put it in my file. And we started a file for him, and we just kept his stories that he'd type over. We were a block and a half from the library, so I'd go there and he'd type them out and print them on their printer and then bring them up to us to hold on to for him.
He must have felt very productive, like you helped him a lot. I feel like that would be a productive day,
Absolutely.
Store with none of that in between publisher nonsense, right?
Forget it. And he didn't even ask us to sell it. He just wanted us to hold on to it for him. Yep, hang on to it, keep it in the file. Yeah, I just think, it's sad, but it's fascinating. And the fact that these people have somewhere to call, and sometimes they just want to be heard.
Yes.
And seen. And that's something that the library is again a safe space for them. And as far as libraries having to go above and beyond, a few weeks ago when the ALA had their annual conference in Chicago, I got to go to a dinner with a lot of the librarians, which was amazing. And what I heard them talking about, and of course, as a bookseller, we see this too, but it's a whole different story when it's a privately owned bookstore versus a publicly run library. And I'm sure you know where I'm going, but what is it like for librarians and library workers to be living in this age of book banning that we've re-entered? I mean, this is you guys are on the front lines of things.
Yeah, I know. It is really stunning right now. I mean, in my particular town, we don't have a lot of issues with that, thankfully. I think possibly some of the children's librarians might deal with it a bit more, but we are not in an area where that is a popular thing to do. But we are surrounded by towns where there have been a couple challenges recently, like big challenges, and people turned out and knocked them down. But it's really frightening. It is like, it's strange to think of this place that it is like so many people, I think, consider it one of the last trustworthy governmental institutions. But here we are, like, being attacked. So it's really dispiriting. And I'm sure it's draining for librarians who are living in an area that are like, facing these challenges nonstop,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't even imagine, and to see them all together, in this room where the camaraderie that I saw between them was heartening, because you saw they were all together and they've got the support of each other, and that was great. So yeah, it was really like I said, in bookstores, and being a virtual bookseller, I see it's out there, but to be among people who are living with this every day and having to deal with it, God bless the librarians. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So okay. I'm just looking, hoping we get a few more questions. I've got one.
Okay.
But before we get to those, we'll give people a chance. So again, please put your questions in the Q&A, and I will get to those in just a couple of moments. I would like to know, I always ask people, what are you reading now, or what have you read recently that you have really enjoyed?
Well, right now I'm reading Samantha Downing's new novel, A Twisted Love Story, because she and I are doing an event in Oakland together next Wednesday. So she lives out there now, and my family is visiting out there anyway. And so we are going to do an event. And so I'm so happy, because it's such a treat to get to read. Sometimes when you have to read a book for something, it's a bit of a drag, but not the case with Samantha's new book. It's really, really fun. So I'm excited for that. And I also read, for the event I did last night in Boston, I read Paul Tremblay's new book of stories, The Beast You Are. And it is fabulous, really fabulous. He has a novella in verse in it, which I found really cool, that half of the book is this novella written in verse, narrated by speaking animals. And it's just the coolest thing, and such a great story.
His, I forget which of his, that was another one I listened to on libro.fm. And for anybody watching, if you are listening to audiobooks on the big A, I'm going to tell you there is an alternative. You can also listen through your library, of course, but libro.fm costs the same. Your credits never expire. You can listen across devices, and A portion of every purchase goes to support your local independent bookstore like Skylark, which is wonderful. But Paul Tremblay's books on audio are I find myself like looking around, like I'm sure I'm being watched or followed. They're so spooky to listen
I
to.
know. I'm sure.
I love them.
Yeah.
Love them. And of course, Samantha is another one who writes these characters that man, some messed up women, and I love every one of them, and I love Samantha, so that'll be a great event.
Yeah.
And of course, we need to know, what are you working on now?
Ooh, yes. So I'm working on a novel. I was really happy because I finished a draft, a very bad draft, but still a draft, of this next novel right before this book came out. So that made me happy, because that's the hardest part for me, is drafting. I don't enjoy it. Like, I enjoy it a little, but I really like revising. And so now I have this complete draft that I can just rip apart and make into something readable, hopefully. But it is based on a harrowing true story that I can't really go into, because it's hard to talk about this novel. But anyway, it's a harrowing true story, based on a harrowing true story about a woman who is being stalked, or believes that she is. And I've changed it a lot. So I've made her be a photographer, kind of modeled on, I don't know if you know Vivian Mayer. She was a photographer. She was called the nanny photographer. Do you remember?
Yes.
In Chicago, actually. She was a nanny in Chicago and in the 1950s. And she was this amazing photographer who never, published her work or anything. But when she died years later, her work was discovered. She became posthumously famous. So she's kind of, this woman is kind of based on her. And I don't know. And then it develops from there. Sorry, I don't have my elevator speech ready for this.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm thrilled to hear there's something coming.
Thank you. It has a touch more of the supernatural, or possibly supernatural, to it. Like, I feel like my books are always horror adjacent. Like psychological horror. This one leans into that a bit more.
I like it. I like it very much. Love a good ghost story, love a spooky story, love a good horror story. They're good. So we have a few audience questions.
Okay.
The first one is, I know booksellers love this novel. I know booksellers love this novel. Have you had feedback from librarians?
Yes, I have, and that they seem to really like it. Or even if they don't love it, they appreciate the setting and like the realistic, they feel seen. At least that's what a lot of people have said. I know my colleagues have really enjoyed it. They, put on a big launch party for me, and it was fantastic. And it's been a lot of fun, to do it at my library and to have it. I wasn't thinking about this, but when I wrote it, but it is a really great angle to have it in a library, because librarians are gonna, they're gonna celebrate it. So
they are, and it's not, I now and then, there's so many books written in the bookstore setting, and sometimes I feel like, the authors might be pandering to the booksellers a little bit, but this just, and a very dear friend of mine was a librarian for 25 years, so she would have many stories about her in a little small town library, and this just felt so real to everything that she used to talk about. And I'm sure that's appreciated.
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I said, we mostly have images of the library in books and film and everywhere that are kind of outdated or were never real in the first place. I always think of like, Mary in what am I thinking of? It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
When
Yes.
her horrible alternate life without George. She was an old maid and a librarian, of course.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
hair in a bun with the pencil and the cat eye glasses.
Yes. Terrible, terrible fate. So I think it's just nice to have, I wanted to show like, libraries are not like that.
Absolutely not. They are very vibrant, very, very vibrant, as you said, community centers. And we have one other question. What is your writing routine given your job at the library? And do you write every day at the same time and place? What is your process?
Good question. I work twice a week, 2 half days. So one of those days I still am able to write in the morning if I'm being very disciplined. But I do have 3 days and I tend to work in the morning. My brain does not work well after about 1 o'clock or so. So I, see my son off to school and then I either stay home or I have a writing space that I go to once or twice a week nearby and I work for 3 to 4 hours. And I just really, when I'm drafting, I try to have a word count in mind. It helps me get through. Like I said, I don't really enjoy the drafting part. So I have like a 1,200 or 1,500 word count. And if I can do that every day, do not care about quality. I do not care about, is the story moving in the right direction? Nothing. There's no thinking. There's just writing. And then at the end of that time, I write a little note or notes about like, okay, what's next? I don't do big outlines of novels because I feel like it kills the organic feel of them, you kind of kill the opportunity to follow the characters where they're going to go, where the story will go. So I just make these little notes like next little piece. And then when I sit down the next day, I have a little guideline, but I don't have this huge map in my head. I'm sure that if I wrote like big sprawling books with lots of plot and characters, I might do things differently. But for now, I like to just be able to kind of go with the flow. But I am very, very disciplined about that morning time. And then, the rest of the day gets eaten up with chores and family stuff. And it's fine because I've written. So
yes. That very important piece is checked off.
Yes.
Well, I would say your process is working very well for you. And I mean, let's talk about this cover real quick before we go. This is the perfect cover.
It really is.
I don't all that often see a cover that I'm like, damn, they nailed it 100%.
That's about what my agent and I said to each other when we first saw it.
Did they present you with several or did they just say, what do you think of this?
They asked me for a file. They said, okay, so make a file of covers that you love and covers that you don't love. And so I collected a bunch. I'm not a fan of the kind of trend of like sloppy writing on books, that I know is very popular. I did not want that on my book. So I made it clear in the do not like file. I do not want this sloppy writing. And I kind of, highlighted some elements I thought might be good, like fire, water, Margot and her baths, and some other things. And just like the atmosphere of it, like I wanted it to feel dark, but like also literary, but also inviting. Anyway, they came back with this and pretty much exactly this. I mean, we moved a few things around, but they totally nailed it.
They really did. Really did. It is so and the sloppy writing just, it wouldn't have worked with a book
No.
about librarians with no, that just never would have worked.
No. Exactly.
So I think Alex will be jumping back in here to close us out. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, I absolutely, the voices of your characters stick in my head and they stay with me. I can still look at the cover of Looker and be pulled right back into those pages. They're like ghostly whispers in my brain.
I love that.
How Can I Help You is a wonderfully devious and dark thriller, and I loved it so much. And again, please do order it from Skylark. We have signed book plates. So if you order it from us, you can get a signed book plate, which will look just lovely inside the cover of this.
That's
So
right.
I have a question, if I'm allowed. So I always have an immense problem with my titles for my books, and one question I did have: why is there no question mark at the end of this? Did you have a discussion about that, and about should there be a question mark?
We did. It was actually, so originally when I had it in manuscript form, it was Poor Strangers was my working title. And that phrase is kind of crucial in the book. But when my agent and I, before we sent it out, he was like, I love Poor Strangers, but I don't know if that's going to call to people like, pick me up. This is a fun read. And I agreed. And so he was like, so we kind of went back and forth on text about like helping, something around help. I think he really came up with it. And we decided leaving the question mark off makes it creepy. And it also... it also lets you like, it kind of adds a layer in of how can I help you? There's nothing I can do to help you. Like that kind of, subtext.
Oh, that's so good. That's so interesting. I'm glad I asked. So just so everyone knows, every little thing is thought about and discussed and analyzed in enormous detail.
True. It's so
nothing is an accident. Well, thank you so much. This is great. I also I have to say, I love the fact that Patricia hates these questions, like the guy who phones up and pretends to be ordering takeout, and the fact that you actually enjoyed all of that, I just adore. And it was just an extra little bonus for me personally.
I'm glad. I do.
Well, again, Laura, thank you so much. Mary, as always, thank you for your wonderful questions. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're recording this, and so this will be available to watch also on our YouTube channel. Again, we would love to sell you a book or two. Please give us a call at 573-777-6990, or you can drop us a line at mail@skylarkbookshop.com, or you can go online and order it from there. Again, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And we'll come back again for your next one.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Mary and Alex. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks, everybody.
Laura. Have a good night.
You too.